Salam and good evening to you. Good afternoon, ladies, gents, Pikachus and devout Muslims of the Quran who might or might not be following this with glee. Or absolutely not following it with glee, they probably hate it. But anyway, we're going to continue with our breakdown of the Quran, in which I will be taking it verse by verse, breaking it down into easily rememberable and understandable factual sentences so that we can understand who is this enigmatic entity, Allah, what is his purpose upon the earth, and what does he intend for you, your loving family, me, and everybody else on earth who is not a devoted Muslim. So before we get started, as I always say, if you have any doubts over the factual accuracy of me or the things that I am saying, please feel free to buy one of these at any good bookshop and read it yourself to find out that everything I'm saying is 100% true to what I've got written here in my summary. So let's get started. Picking up from where we left off yesterday, where we got to is the Israelites and Moses have just successfully escaped the Egyptians by going across the sea, and they were slowly chased down by a bunch of heavily armed Egyptian guards, and they're hunter-gatherers with no weapons, so they should have technically been killed, but through some miracle, Moses parted the sea so that they could leisurely walk across it to the desert, and then the leisurely walking ended for the Egyptians when the sea washed them all away and killed them. Thusly, the Israelis got away, they did a sacrifice to their God, and now they're going to do a group hug and they're going to set up Israel. Meanwhile, the Muslims, the Egyptians, with Allah and his angels there, are really bloody pissed off because things aren't going so well for them. So that's where we left off. So, and by the way, that was verses 1 to 80 in the Quran. So we're going to set off with verse 81, which in my summary is sentence number 50. So here we go. Sentence number 50. They say, we're only damned for 3 days, whereas you guys are going to be damned forever. Say to them, only Allah can make these bargains though, your God can't. Or do you think you know better than Allah? So what this means, if we break it down, as it's a bit, I feel like I need to explain these things because it's very confusing and oddly written. It's difficult to understand this part of the Quran, so I'll break it down for you. They say, what this means is Allah and his angels are talking to the Israelis and Moses. They is the Israelis and Moses. And what's happening here is even though the Israelis have buggered off to set up their Israel across the sea, we can't now get to them from Egypt, Allah is actually talking to his Muslims here. Even though he's addressing the Israelites, he's doing it as a kind of storybook mode thing to his Muslims. And the reason he's doing that is because the Muslims now are starting to get pretty frustrated and pissed off with Allah. Even though they can't say it in here, because they get killed if they have any doubts, they must be thinking, hang on a minute, you had a covenant with us. You said these guys were going to be our slaves. You said these guys were going to have their firstborn sons killed. You said these guys were on a plague. You said these guys were going to be starving and hating it because they weren't worshipping you and doing all this Quran stuff that we have to do. And you said we were going to be having a great time with loads of slaves doing all our work. You said we were going to be rich and happy and have full bellies, and we were going to be worshipping you and being really happy about it. But that's not what happened, is it? So the Egyptians are looking at Allah kind of sidey, and they're thinking rebellion, and Allah knows this, so this is why he's doing this. So with that in mind, what he says is, they say, you will be going to hell forever. We'll only be going to hell for 3 days. And then in replying to them saying that, what you say back to them is, no, you're wrong about that. Only Allah can make these deals. So obviously your deal is fake, even though it looks like it's really real. Even though everything you said was going to happen has happened. Even though you're about to set up Israel with a full belly, really happy, group hugging in the desert, and about to set up a new town, doing sacrifices. Even though all that's happening and we're having a sucky time with no slaves, no food, and a famine, and a plague, and no firstborn sons, even though all that's happening, no. Allah's the reason they're doing well over there, because he's helping them out, because he's graceful and merciful despite the fact that he hates them. And the only reason he's not helping out the Muslims is because they're not worshipping him enough. So the pretext is, Muslims, don't be thinking about rebellion, worship me harder. But that's the reason why you're doing shit. It's nothing to do with me. It's because you're not worshipping me enough. And the reason the Israelis are doing well is because they're secretly worshipping me, like I said in the last video. So that's what this means. So anyway, let's carry on. 51. No, they are fattened with sin and evil and shall burn forever in the infinite fires of hell, those who question Allah and don't follow the Quran. A short verse this time, and I feel like it's pretty simple to figure out what's going on here. We're still doing the whole discussion about who's going to hell and how long they're going for, and we're still in the place of Allah and his angels, trying to negotiate a better position with the Egyptians, because like I said, the Egyptians are not particularly happy that a minute ago they had all these guys over here as slaves and they were getting promised the world by Allah. None of those promises came out. They're now hungry, full of famine, full of pestilence, they're suffering, they've got no firstborn sons and no slaves, and they have to go and pick their own food. And all the while, Israelis who used to be their slaves are over there having a group hug, setting up Israel, sacrificing the best bits of their food to their God, because they've got loads and they've got water coming out of rocks thanks to Moses. And it just doesn't seem very fair to the Egyptians, because they've been doing their devout Quran thing and they've been worshipping like mad and it hasn't been working. So that's why Allah is saying to them, no, they are full of sin and evil, and they shall burn forever in the fires of hell because they're not following this. That's what this means. They're saying to the Muslims, regardless of how it looks, follow Allah's commands and it will improve for you. The only reason that none of this stuff has happened is because Allah's commands weren't followed by the Muslims enough, and that's why they're suffering, whereas the evil Jews over there were secretly worshipping Allah, and that's the only reason that Allah has helped them to do this. It's nothing to do with Moses. Remember, he's bad now. That's what this means. So, 52. If you worship Allah without question and do this purposefully and show real commitment, then you'll go to heaven no matter what. So once again, this is Allah talking to his Muslims and trying to reassure them, because like I said, they've got doubts. They're probably thinking about rebellion, even though they can't say it in there because whoosh, they'll lose their heads. Allah is reassuring his Muslims and Egyptians, no matter what happened here, no matter what you see, no matter what it looks like, if you worship Allah without question, i.e. if you're thinking about rebellion, don't. If you worship Allah without question and do this purposefully, like really take it home, really do the worshipping harder, really worship me more and more and do the Quran stuff more and more, and show commitment, as in stop whinging amongst yourselves and doubting me, just fucking get on with the worship of me, guys, and then no matter what, you'll go to heaven. So you can ignore the thing about going to hell that they just told you. That's not true. That's what this means. 54. Remember, we took over your covenant, Israelites, which is the same as the old one you had, you know, the one with your fake God that he wasn't going to do. We took over, Allah and the angels, we took over that covenant. But while your evil guy, the God who doesn't exist, is not real, apart from when he's killing you with lightning bolts and we have to resurrect you, apart from then, he's not real. And now he's gone back to being not real. Apart from that, with the covenant that we took over, you know, because we're doing it now, the reason why you're over there having a great time is actually because of Allah. In addition to that, the reason we're not killing you, the reason you're over there having a great time, the reason we're not chasing you from your lands right now and killing and raping and murdering you, is because of Allah. And if you don't believe me, ask the Israelites. They saw it for themselves with their own two eyes. This is so great. So if we break this down, I love this so much. If we break that down, this is more excuses from Allah, because remember, he's still talking to the Muslims. Even though he's claiming he's saying this to the Israelites are gone and they're not coming back. Moses is gone and he's not coming back. They're over there having a great time with food, water, building a town, having a group hug, worshipping and being happy and thankful to their God, who doesn't exist, according to this. Meanwhile, the Egyptians are hating every minute of it and they are angry that the Israelites are doing better than them. Plus, they've now got no slaves, so they have to go and pick their own food. They can't because they don't know how. The Israelites were the ones that knew how to do it because they've been doing it. And now they're over there, free, having a great time. So what Allah's really saying to his Muslims here is, remember, even though it looks bad, no matter what you can see and what you think is happening, remember, Allah knows best. Those guys are secretly worshipping Allah, me, in the book, so that's why I'm helping them out, because I'm merciful and graceful and kind. I'm helping them dumb, stupid Jews out because they asked, even though we're going to kill them later. And except for when he tries to kill them, their God isn't real, so actually they're worshipping nothing, they're wasting their time, and in future they are going to die. And by the way, if you don't believe me, you can ask any of them. They'll definitely agree with me. And they witnessed it with their own eyes, so it must be true. Allah is only saying this because he knows they're enemies now. There's no fucking way any of these Egyptians are getting across that ocean to go and ask their enemies in Israel. By the way, did Allah actually say this to you? Did you really see it with your own eyes? There's no way they can ever know that. So, in keeping with the previous passages, they have to just follow Allah's commands, not doubt anything he says, make sure they do the Quran stuff and worship, worship, worship. And by the way, don't bother asking anyone else, because even the Israelis, the dumb, stupid Israelis who are our enemies, even they agree that Allah's better. Even they saw it with their own eyes, so it must be true. Okay, so no more rebellion, get back to worshipping. That's what this means. So that's only 6 passages. We'll do the other 2 that we missed out today tomorrow, because I feel like this really does need to be gone through in some detail. We've got some juicy stuff in here. So to conclude what we've gone through in these 6 passages, we start off with Allah talking to the Muslims. Even though he's addressing the Israelites in his speech bubble, he's doing it to the Muslims. So he's saying to the Muslims, when you're arguing with those guys over there, this is what they're going to say. They're going to say, you guys, your God hasn't done you any favours, has he? Kept all these promises to us, you know, because we're secretly worshipping him. But he hasn't kept any of your promises, has he? We're no longer your slaves. We're building our own town. You've got famine, plague and no slaves, and you're hating it. And you still have to do all the worship, but we don't. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe he's not real. Maybe you'll go to hell for your worship of Allah and your Quran stuff. We'll only go for 3 days because we got this covenant with our God who doesn't exist according to this. No, and they have to say back to that. So Allah's actually expressly telling them, when these guys bring you these logical arguments and well-informed debates to try and convince you that you're wrong about me, this is what you say back to them. You say, no, I'm not listening. Only Allah can make these bargains. So anything good that you're experiencing, all the good stuff that you've got, the water coming out of the rocks that Moses did, escaping from Egypt, making Israel, all of that stuff isn't down to your God, who by the way is not real according to this. All that stuff is secretly being done by Allah in his grace and mercy, because you're secretly worshipping him better than we're openly worshipping him here. So that's what he's saying. He's saying, Egyptians, stop moaning about your crappy scenario and situation you're in. It's your own fault because you didn't worship me hard enough. And stop moaning about the Israelis having a victory over you, escaping without drawing a sword, having food and water and building a town and being happy. That's only happening because their secret worship of me is better than your open worship of me. So get back to the worshipping. And then he punctuates that over the next 2 passages by going, also, when these Israelis are trying to do this logical debate thing, when they're trying to counter your negatives with fair, factual arguments, you know, like you would, no, you cut them off, you don't let them finish, you say no, and then you remind yourself that these guys are fattened with evil and sin. They're not fat because they've got food and water and because they're happy. No, the thing that's making them fat and happy and gleeful isn't that. The thing that's making them gleeful is the sin and evil that they are steeped in and fattened up with, and they're so dumb and stupid and evil. And by the way, they shall burn forever in heaven because they're not following this, even though they are worshipping me enough to get Israel going and be fed and watered like you're not. So Allah's making constant excuses because he knows in his head the Egyptians must be thinking, this guy Allah is making all these promises, promised us the world. And we're following him, we're doing all this unusual stuff that we probably don't really want to do, even being at war with the Israelis. We might not even agree with that, even though we're not allowed to say. But we're doing it because we want the stuff that he's promised us, and he has not given it to us. Even though he made all these promises, none of them have come through. Not only that, the stuff he said he was going to do to those guys, we're getting the bad stuff that he promised on those guys, and they're getting all the good stuff he promised to us. But we're not allowed to argue with it. We've got to just worship, 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 and we're fucking not happy. So then Allah goes, if you worship me without question and do this purposefully and show commitment, then you will be happy and get everything you want, and then you will go to heaven. Whereas those guys won't. Even though they look happy now, they're dead and they'll go to hell forever and burn. So get back to your worshipping. And then he goes, remember, we took over the covenant with those Israelites. The only reason they're doing well over there is because of Allah and their secret worship of me. And by the way, guys, let's remind you that the reason that you're not doing so well isn't because of them and their covenant. No, that's fake. Their covenant is only working out because they're secretly worshipping Allah. You guys need to worship harder. The reason your stuff's not going well and your famine and drought problems are bad and why all your firstborn sons are dead and why your slaves just escaped and now they're setting up a town bigger than yours and they're doing well is because you didn't worship Allah well enough. So get fucking on with it. And then finally, remember, we took over your covenant, which is the same as the old one but slightly better. The only difference is you got to worship Allah this time, not your fake god that doesn't exist. But unlike your evil guy who doesn't exist, we aren't going to kill you. We're not going to drive you out your town. We're not going to make anything bad happen to you at all. We're not going to trouble you. And you're going to have water and you're going to have food and you're going to have safety to build your town. So Allah is making a final point of saying, guys, I can explain this, right? It's not what it looks like. That's what he's doing here. He's saying, I can explain this. It's not what it looks like. They're only doing well because I'm letting them do well because they prayed to me. But as I told you in the last episode, it's all part of the plan. Moses is a secret agent, remember? He's only doing that because I brainwashed him into being a disbeliever who works for me. And in the end, those guys are going to die and we're going to take all the stuff that they're now building. All the food they've got is going to be ours. All their water is going to be ours. All their women are going to be ours. All their gold will belong to us. But only if you keep worshipping me. And by the way, even the Israelis will agree with this if you ask them. They saw it themselves with their own 2 eyes. So that caps off our reading, and that's how far we're going to get in today's episode. So, what does this all mean in relation to Allah's personality and his character in the way that he's behaved? Well, I think we've gone through enough evidence before today and in today's that Allah is not someone who keeps his promises. Allah is a person who makes many, many promises, but you have to do the thing before he'll reward you. He doesn't reward you first and then give you faith. No, you give him faith. He rewards you after you've worshipped him loads. And by the way, now we can see most of the stuff he promises you, despite the fact that you worship him hard, you don't get it. All you get is worship me harder. It's your own fault. Also, the promises he made about how our dumb, evil Jew enemies over there are going to have a tough time and not going to be fed, not going to be watered. All their firstborn sons will die and they will be killed or slaves. None of that stuff worked out either. So Allah is demonstrably, recordably, accurately, factually not an honest guy in this very book, in his own scriptures, in his own words. He constantly contradicts himself. He makes a million promises to everyone and doesn't come through with them all. And the actual real reason he hates the Israelis and their God that doesn't exist is because he absolutely hates the fact that that God keeps his promises to the fucking evil dumb Jews that he hates. And the miracles that they're getting, he just hates it. Like, he's tried to take the credit for all the miracles, but he's finding it increasingly difficult to take the credit for the miracles when they're against him and his Egyptians. So we know now, Allah's deceitful. He doesn't look after his own people very well. He's using the Egyptians to try and get at the Israelis. So that's his main goal in life. Allah's purpose is to fuck up the Israelis and prove that God isn't real. And second, after that, it's to get everyone to worship him and bow down to him, no matter what. So, I feel like we've concluded nicely. So that's the end of this episode. Tomorrow we'll be picking up where we left off with the Israelis building their town and the Egyptians trying not to rebel, and Allah telling them, if you're thinking about rebellion, fucking don't. And then giving them more excuses and saying, honestly guys, just bear with me now and keep doing more worship and you'll eventually get your prize. The only reason they're getting anything is because of me, and you'll be next on the list for Christmas presents and meals and getting all the stuff you want, as long as you keep doing this. And also you'll go to heaven and they'll go to hell. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. And like always, God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Oh, that was fun, wasn't it? So, catch up with me tomorrow if you want to find out how Allah allegedly is the reason why Christ can perform miracles and why the Jews are so successful. So anyway, that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.